Good evening, Council, members of the public. I'm calling to order our Strategic Initiative Standing Committee meeting of April 3rd. And we're going to start with the land acknowledgement, and I'd ask Councillor Jeffrey, please.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation.
Thank you. So the motion with respect to the agenda is as follows, that the content of the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee agenda for April 3rd, 2023 be adopted as presented. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Doherty and Deputy Mayor Fryer, thank you. Any changes or comments about the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's unanimous, thank you. Would there be any declarations of pecuniary interest this evening? If you find yourself in that position, please let me know. Would there be any deputations this evening, Clerk Gomez?
No, there is not, Your Worship.
Okay, so the first item up for discussion will be to hear an update on the Collingwood Tree Canopy Preservation Project progress.
Thank you, Worship. Am I on?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. Thanks. So thank you. I thought I'd come up here because it felt friendlier than sitting back there and introducing people that are going to be up here. So thought I would just share with you. Background to this project is that back in August of 2022, Council approved $75,000 towards this, and our RFQ coming out of that didn't actually yield results initially. So the deadline was extended, and in accordance with purchasing bylaws, staff approached industry networks to find a provider. Coming out of the pandemic, many of the professional associations associated with development have been exceptionally busy, so we're really pleased when SGL Planning agreed to accept the challenge. We were able to kick off the project in November. And this update is intended to provide a quick summary of the work done since then, as well as gain any feedback from yourselves as members of council, and also to signal upcoming public engagement related to the project. So without further ado, I'll introduce SGL partner and head of urban design, Catherine J., and Tim Kane, senior associate for SGL.
Of the presentation. Good evening, committee, staff, public. Thanks for having us this evening to go through the presentation and have a discussion about this very interesting and exciting project. Next slide, please. So this evening, Tim and I are going to split the responsibility on this presentation. I'm going to go through the purpose, why we're here, the project overview, highlight the key deliverables. Tim's going to take over. He's going to speak to some key considerations for this project, where we are, why it's important, and we'll talk about some next steps and then answer any questions and take any feedback. Next slide, please. So the overall purpose of the presentation, as Dean mentioned, is to officially kick off this project and provide committee with an update and next steps with regards to the recommendations that came out of the staff report. If you recall, in August of 2022, staff brought forward a report with recommendations with regards to the town's tree canopy. And that laid out some strategic direction and a set of deliverables. The acorn on the slide represents where we are in the process. And this is a very high-level graphic to give everyone an idea of where we're headed and a few different milestones. We've been doing some background, some initial work to get up to speed, but we haven't done any details with regards to drafting any of the documents that I'm going to touch on. It's important to note on here, even though there's one square that represents community engagement, you'll see later on when Tim talks specifically to engagement that there's going to be various touch points through the project and things set up so that there can be feedback from committee, staff, and the public as well. Next slide, please. So this slide overviews for everyone the 5 branches of deliverables for this project, and I'll speak to each one of them, but we're going to be doing an update to your urban design manual. We're going to be also helping with the revised and updated engineering standards. We're going to be helping staff prepare a draft site alteration bylaw. We're going to be working on the draft tree bylaw, as well as a process for future tree monitoring once all these pieces are put in place. Next slide, please. So the Urban Design Manual has been a document that the town's been using for quite some time now. It does have guidance throughout it with regards to site planning, tree planting, landscaping, but in particular, it has a focus on the tree canopy in section 10.g, where it really just has a statement with regards to projects maintaining or implementing a minimum of a 30% tree canopy on a site-by-site basis. So for the manual, we're going to focus on updating this section of the manual to reflect science-based best practices, evidence-based with regards to tree planting, soil quality, soil volume, space needed for trees to be successful, watering information for implementation. The importance is really focusing the development community on getting trees planted successfully so that they can mature and grow and contribute to the overall tree canopy for the town. One of the big things is balancing the priorities within the urban area, and trees are one piece of that when you come to different development applications. So it's really important for us to lay the foundation, provide the groundwork for the town to ensure that we're planting the right tree in the right place. And as I mentioned, putting all these guidelines in the manual to help that happen. It's also important that what we put in the manual is going to align with the other deliverables that we have, and we really are focused, and you'll probably hear this throughout the project, is the right tree in the right place. I think that's a really important slogan, for lack of better term, for us to focus on. Next slide, please. We understand that the town is doing an update to their existing engineering standards manual. And as part of that, we're going to help inform some standards, best practices, details with regards to tree preservation, tree planting, to make sure that when development heads towards implementation, the town has the tools at its fingertips to ensure that the trees can be happy and healthy. And as I mentioned with the urban design manual, the key is really linking everything together so it all speak to each other with regards to, from beginning to end, with regards to development or town initiated projects, that the long-term health of the trees is successful. Next slide, please. The third deliverable is a draft site alteration bylaw. So we'll be helping the town prepare a draft of this type of bylaw. So we will be looking at best practices near and far to help inform that. Again, this is an important piece of implementation when it comes to development in capturing that tree preservation piece very early in the process, so development isn't moving forward before tree preservation has had an opportunity to be dealt with. So we'll be helping staff to add some of those components to the update, and our understanding is then the town will finish that bylaw off. Next slide, please. Tree bylaw. So the town currently has an existing tree bylaw. So we'll be looking at what is in that existing tree bylaw. We will be looking at maybe giving it a new name so that it's a little bit more of a positive piece of legislation. Making sure that the tree bylaw, the engineering standards, the urban design manual all are speaking the same language. And overall, some good education around what the tree bylaw should be, who it applies to, how it applies to, and then we'll also be looking at the piece of implementation with regards to the tree bylaw and how it can be successful and what the town will need as far as resources to ensure that that happens. I think it's really important that we understand that the tools that we bring forward are going to reflect a balanced, implementable position for trees within the town, particularly when you're dealing with so many different influences that are happening with regards to development, growth, environmental matters, climate change. So this is an important piece of document to bring all that together. Next slide, please. The last piece of deliverables, save and accept the engagement piece, is the tree monitoring piece. And what this will do is once all the documents in place, we're going to help staff ensure that they can maintain and monitor trees, existing trees, as well as those future trees that will be planted. And we'll be looking at different data sources as well as different best practices to be able to make sure that that piece is easily implementable and easily maintained by the town in the long term. Next slide, please. The next slide is engagement, and I'm going to hand it off to Tim. He's going to speak to the next few slides.
Good evening, everyone. Council, committee, and staff. I've been told to stand very close to this microphone, and I think Catherine nailed it, so I'll try and do the same thing. Good evening, and I'm going to pick up where Catherine left off and talk about the community engagement piece of this project. Like every project, that effective community engagement is key for developing those tools that Catherine ran through and mentioned to you. You know, those tools are going to best reflect the goals of this project, and, you know, better yet, you know, reflect the outcome that the council would ultimately like to see moving this forward. I'd also like to take this chance to thank the town's communications team. They've been great getting us to where we are and helping us build that communication plan using the new template. And we're going to be working with them closely over the next couple of weeks just to finalize that document as we go through it. So the work to date has been tremendous foundation for us, both the Urban Forestry Master Plan and the Council Update Report from last year. That's given us a great footing to start off with. You know, in terms of showing us what's out there, you know, setting some of the community expectations ahead of time so that we have a better understanding of that moving into the engagement phase of this, so we're not coming in stone cold, and being prepared. You know, we have seen what's been happening with the neighbors near here, and quite frankly, we don't want to go down the same path, and I don't think we need to be honest. I think we have a great start and a great plan to deal with that and to hear from this community. So the town's RFP and the work plan are based on that initial understanding that I just talked about, those opportunities and challenges that we have, and the idea of bringing in best practices early on in the process. You know, this isn't the first community that struggled with tree canopy coverage and effective engagement. So, you know, those lessons that have been learned in other places, you know, certainly want to bring those into this project. You know, draft those initial documents, as Catherine mentioned, you know, the guidelines, the bylaws, as a foundational piece. You know, when we go out and engage with the community, we have this foundational piece of information that is reflecting best practices and something to build the conversation on as we move forward. So very important to have that common understanding and then layer on the engagement piece once some of those key pieces of information are there and we can communicate and educate at the same time. At the same time, we don't want to create engagement fatigue. So there's lots going on these days, and time is more and more precious for everyone, it seems. So, you know, the engagement plan is going to be looking for not only unique opportunities associated with this project, but also where we can springboard off and use opportunities where the town is already speaking to residents in other formats and locations, and using that information, augmented, of course, by the very effective online platform that you have, based on the Bang the Table model. And using that platform basically as a database, not only for council, but also for residents and stakeholders as well, where, you know, there's a single point of single location for all this information as we go forward. And at the same time, people can see their comments, can see responses to comments as we're hearing them to date, to know that they're being listened to, not just heard. And that's a key difference there that we're going to be building into this engagement plan moving forward. It's, you know, simply hearing someone is different than actually listening to the concerns that they may have or the ideas that they may have, more importantly. Also, too, we're going to be actively seeking out those most affected by the new policies. So, you know, everyone from developers to kids who are listening, and not to confuse the two, you kids are going to be living with this for multiple generations, and the developers are going to be the ones trying to, balance those other needs and wants of the community into the projects that they're putting forward. So a couple of key groups there. And importantly, understanding who's not at the table in terms of being inclusive and hearing from a diverse set of voices. It's important too that the engagement plan try to identify those that aren't typically here in front of council, so that those thoughts and considerations can be incorporated into the project. And finally, and most importantly, and it was left to the end of this slide for a reason, is the engagement with our Indigenous communities who know this land and trees better than any of us can hope to. And certainly we think, will be able to give us new ideas and to, at the same time, honor their cultures and traditions, through their knowledge of this important community asset. Next slide, please. So this is a wordy one, sorry, but we thought it was important to at least flash up, and you can read it as I'm talking. I won't be offended, but at least flash up some of those key points that we've been hearing in this process to date. So these are ideas that have come through the urban forestry plan, master plan, through the update report from last year, and certainly probably the previous council had some ideas of these comments. The idea was to reiterate these tonight. And reintroduce this project and, give a heads up as to things that we are hearing. And also, more importantly, when we get to the end of this presentation, hear from this committee about those things that, they may like to hear or that you want us to start considering now, so that we can start building them into the tools, especially that initial set of tools, so that some of those things, or as many of those things as possible, can be reflected before we start to engage with the community. So just to try and summarize some of the points on the screen without laboring it too much, in terms of a target, we've heard clearly that, we need something rational and defensible moving forward. We think that there's, good data here already that we can build upon and consolidate, with our community partners. The next thing is the importance of this canopy. At the same time, though, Collingwood has many other important considerations and programs that need to be balanced with it. It's a small geographic area, so how do we mix this canopy of trees that we have now with those other important projects that are bringing housing or employment lands to this municipality? And along that note, understanding the physical fabric of the community, the public and private spaces, vegetation areas, valley lands, et cetera, et cetera. The canopies don't have a boundary to work to. So, they straddle public and private lands. Some are in protected areas, some are on sites that are going to be developed or earmarked for development through, the long-term planning policies. So, we need to get a handle on, how to treat those different areas through these different tools that we're developing. And importantly, too, augmenting and supporting existing programs. So, to, everything from sustainability programs to, to other programs that, rely or deal with trees, operations, for example, how do we, put the round peg in the round hole, so to speak, and make sure that this is compatible and reinforces those operations and activities and programs and projects that the town is already doing. And getting down into the implemental stage of this, life is already complicated enough. We need something that's implementable and practical. Success will minimize the enforcement side of this if we get it right. And I think, the strong, the foresight of council to basically bundle up all of these various tools together at one time into one project, as much as it makes Catherine's and I's jobs a little harder sometimes, having those 5 balls in the air at one time is sometimes a good thing to make sure that they're all talking to each other as we move this project forward. And then just rounding out the slide, when we're talking about compensation, the second last bullet point, if we do need compensation, which, hopefully we try to retain first, but if compensation is on the table, then what's the real cost to maintain that canopy and protect, what are those long-term goals that are important for this community? And then finally, last but not least, again, is just the data collection piece of this. So, how do we ensure success? How do we measure success? And, when Catherine and I are gone, how do these tools get refined and improved by the town moving forward to ensure that continued success? Next slide, please. Yep. Perfect. So as I mentioned, we have that good base to work upon through that the urban forest master plan. There's 10 goals in there that are very aligned, with our project, obviously, and with the RFP document that we responded to. So we feel quite confident that the program that we're introducing tonight goes a long way to implementing that study that was done. The other important part of that study was this 31.7% number. That, is it the right number or not? And, it's a very strong starting point. Catherine's experience with this, more so than mine, confirmed that Collingwood's in a much stronger position than many other communities and is an enviable position, to be honest, to be starting at 31.7%. But we don't want to take that for granted either. So, it's hard to recoup these features once they're lost. At the same time, we don't want to be overly protective to hold back the town from those other initiatives that they want to be doing. But at the same time, we need to have, we need affirmation that 31.7 is a reasonable canopy coverage, and it is going to reflect the needs of this community moving forward and making it, all those things that you want it to be, including resilient and healthy for its residents. And quite frankly, now is the time to start aligning the tools and the documents of the town, as I mentioned, for consistency. Those 5 balls in the air to bring consistency to that, to get better outcomes, and to make sure that we're all working towards that same target in concert with each other. And certainly a good example of this, and I'm not looking at summer when I say this, but the official plan is coming up. There is a number in there that we want to continue to reinforce wherever we can, and at the same time put the necessary policies in place to complement all the other efforts that we're undertaking as part of this project. And I didn't want to remind anyone, but the 2024 budget cycle, I'm sure, is coming up soon. So we want to give staff lots of time to implement those tools and integrate them into that process as well moving forward. Next slide, please. So the Why Act and what are we trying to do? And I touched on that in the last slide a little bit. There's a little bit of overlap there, but protecting the asset that you have and augmenting that where necessary, and balancing those other priorities in the community that I touched on a little bit. Maintaining that canopy is not new or unique. And like I said, there's best practices out there that we want to bring to bear on this on a more local level to help out and to protect this asset wherever we can and augment it wherever we can. The growth pressures, no surprise, like many other municipalities in the province right now, and based on new data that we're seeing in terms of how quickly this country is growing, Collingwood has an added pressure of being a primary settlement area, as we know, and also the added pressure of being one of the nicest places in the country to live. So, combine those two things, and it puts a lot of pressure on those things to protect that make this community great, and certainly are looking forward to trying to do that. Also, too, there's environmental changes happening. We're in the midst of change. Climate change is happening slowly but surely. At the same time, it seems like every year there's a new invasive species that we've never heard of that's adding further stress to our canopy. How do we put the trees that we have, in the best position possible to increase their survival rates, to increase their resiliency, but also the community resiliency as well, as we respond to these environmental changes as they're occurring. The idea is to come back, when we've gone through and digested, this information that we presented tonight and what we're going to hear tonight, hopefully from the committee, is communicating this back to council and to stakeholders as the project progresses in the form of a problem statement, trying to capture the essence of those goals that I mentioned in the Urban Forestry Master Plan, distilling that down into a specific problem statement so that we can really look at the outcome that we want to achieve as part of this project. And one thing that I've learned in my career so far, and one thing that I want to bring, to this project, that there's little things that we can do, and there's big things that we can do that will make significant differences as time goes on. So the idea is to coordinate those with a set of effective tools moving forward. Next slide, please. And this is a general outline of the next steps. Once we finalize that engagement plan with staff, we'll put some finer points on this. But essentially, as Catherine mentioned, we have been working on getting those draft documents in place and start to feed those into the Engage Collingwood page as well. Coming back to council with a touch point, around the time of those draft documents in second quarter of this year. hitting the community engagement piece in earnest, and certainly meeting with our Indigenous communities as part of that in Q2 as well. And then continuing to evolve those documents, based on what we're hearing through that active listening that I mentioned. And then coming back with council with more updates, before those documents are finalized, before we get into any sticky public meetings, where there may be differences of opinions. We want to avoid the surprises wherever possible and build those into a set of balanced and effective policies as part of this project. So that concludes our presentation, and happy to answer any questions that committee may have. Thank you.
Well, that was great. Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, and I'm so happy to see this presentation and this project begin to go forward this year. I had, I guess, two questions. And first of all, you spoke a bit about the 31.7% canopy coverage. So were you suggesting that you would be re-quantifying or re-evaluating our canopy right now? Will you be doing a canopy count?
We won't be doing a count specific as the urban forestry management plan did, but what we will do with staff's assistance is look at what that plan showed. So in the document, it has it's got some mapping in there that shows the canopy and what they looked at. What we will do, and Tim spoke to this, is reflect upon that and what is happening in the town with regards to future development, particularly how or if that might impact that number, and make some calls on what that might mean in the future, if that is a reasonable target to maintain. A lot of municipalities have a minimum 30% target, so we're pretty comfortable with that number. It may be that the number doesn't change, but there'll be some tools or policies or practices put in place to balance as you move forward. So if trees are coming out due to development, how do they get replaced? So those are the types of things that we'll look at.
Great, thank you. And then just, Your Worship, just if I may, just one other question, and that you reference public and private tree. When we talk about private tree, is this going to be properties of a smaller size than what we currently, I think our bylaw applies to properties that are, and I'm sure Director of Planning will correct me, 5 acres or more. And I'm just wondering if as part of this, we will be looking at a private tree bylaw that might apply to like individual residential properties where we seem to be losing a lot of trees.
So we're not far enough in the process yet to know. That is one of the things that we will look at, is what's in the existing tree bylaw, as far as how it applies to private versus public versus those lands that are slated for future development, and then we'll look at the size requirements. We'll look at a number of other tree bylaws that how the sizes that they apply. One of the things we want to ensure is it's a balanced bylaw, so it doesn't handcuff individual residents in what they could or couldn't do, but making sure that there's something in place that if somebody wants to take down a tree of a certain size and health, that there's a process in place that the town can go through. Those are the types of things that we'll look at, but we're not far enough in the process to know what that might be. So,
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. I do have a question. Well, maybe it's a comment. I do find it very frustrating when a new development goes in and it's basically clear cut for trees. I don't understand the development process. Maybe I will in the next few years, but is it not something worth looking at to possibly be able to keep the 30, I believe it's 31.7% of the trees on that lot? I understand some developments are just in empty lots, but I'm thinking of one development in particular coming up that has got quite a significant tree canopy, and I'd hate to see that pulled out. So is there any process?
yeah, so the site alteration bylaw process is an important one to be looking at. Trees prior to soil stripping prior to that development. So that's one of the pieces that we will be looking at. And in my experience, what that process should do is look at tree preservation up front and ensure that there's an approval in place. Now, it also does depend on what the lands are designated for as far as development, as to whether or not that 30% on the site makes sense. It also depends on the size of the site. So I don't know the specifics about that development, but what you're talking about is always a gray area with regards to a tree bylaw and development, and that's, in my opinion, that's where the site alteration process can really come into play to help before anything happens and the trees are cut down before it's too late to understand what might happen.
Right. Thank you. And thank you, Mayor Hamlin. I do have one more question. I do find it frustrating as well that there could be significantly mature trees that are taken down and replaced with basically little spindles that probably in my lifetime will not mature. I do find that frustrating. That's more just a comment than anything, but I do want to share that as well. I think quite a few people share that opinion.
It's an important one, and that's why I did mention the whole right tree in the right place, and the things that we'll look at are evidence-based in science with regards to soil volume, soil quality, making sure the trees have enough space. There's lots of work that has been done that does show that the small trees that you put in that environment, and if they get the proper watering within the first 2 years, that they will take, and once they take, depending on the species, they can grow up and then contribute to the canopy. So it's understood.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. I'd just like to follow up on Councillor Perry's point. I think I know the development he's talking about. You've got a challenge ahead of you in the sense that you're in the mushy middle, as it were, in regard to negotiating with developers, because assuming you or a botanist identifies specific trees that they would like to preserve, presumably in the whole planning process, that becomes a bargaining chip with the developer to say, council really wants to save these specific trees or this grove of trees or whatever. So you'll have to give us the tools, council, to be able to bargain in that sense. Perhaps bargain is the inappropriate term, but to negotiate, because we know what we would like to end up with, and we know certainly what the developer wants to end up with. It'd be nice to be able to see both. And if you can help us produce those tools, that would be a wonderful thing, actually. There have been several instances in the last 2 or 3 weeks, both in the town of the Blue Mountains and in Collingwood, where bush or forests, little ones, have been just clear cut, and it's been dramatic and traumatic for many citizens to drive by and see that and hear questions, as I'm sure other councillors do. So Godspeed in your work.
Well, I've been through it before, so unfortunately it's not unique to Collingwood. So hopefully we can bring our experience and help put some tools in place that will help deal with that. Unfortunately, there's always those nighttime burnings and cuttings that may happen.
Any other questions?
No further questions. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just say thank you so much for coming and explaining what you'll be doing. You're going to find we have a very engaged community, and a lot of the issues we've dealt with over the last several years when new development comes forward has been around our, I would say, old and needing to be updated urban design manuals and engineering development standards and so on, the exact things you're looking at. And in fact, in the summer, I had a couple tell me they had moved here recently for another community and had spent 2 years fighting for a tree bylaw, and they were ready. They wanted me to tell them what to do. They were ready. So I'm so glad you'll be here to help engage with our community and, deal with this important matter for us. So thank you. Okay.
Much.
So we have a staff report on this agenda, which is the consideration of a municipal accommodation tax. Director Valentine, you'll kick this off.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good evening to everyone. Manager Kenny, who should be appearing on the screen momentarily, and his team have done a significant amount of due diligence work to explore the imposition of a municipal accommodation tax, or a MAT, in Collingwood in accordance with the direction previously provided in the endorsed Economic Development Action Plan. So the project is now at the stage where more targeted research and stakeholder engagement would be warranted, including the review and recommendation of a governance structure that would maximize the desired outcomes of a MAT. But before going too far down that path, we did want to bring the project back before you to explore the initial findings and speak around this table to gauge your appetite to move forward overall. On the whole, staff would suggest that a MAT does have significant benefits for the town and is used as a tool by many municipalities to fund tourism promotion and related activities, and potentially to augment other municipal funding streams. So I do see Manager Kenny has appeared on the screen, and he will briefly summarize his report, and we look forward to the resulting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Manager Kenny, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good to see you all this evening. Thank you for the opportunity. So as Director Valentine mentioned, I'll give a brief overview. You have the report in front of you as well, and happy to take any questions or comments after that. So the initial purpose this evening is to seek council direction and a check-in, so to speak, on whether to proceed further with a municipal accommodation tax, which I'll call a MAT from now on. With a follow-up recommendation proposed with sort of the meat of the decision for council if they do decide to seek further data and consultation by September of 2023. So today we'll provide a bit of introductory data on what might be collected and on some COVID recovery notes as well, because I know that would be a key consideration in here. As a background, a MAT is collected by accommodators and remitted to the municipality. The municipality has flexibility in what accommodators might participate, whether it be size or composition. We'll get into short-term rentals a little bit on this as we go. Generally, the funds that are collected, a minimum of 50% must go towards related tourism activities. And it could be more than 50%, but minimum of 50%. And the remainder is for general municipal revenues. So there's no restrictions on what council could do with that. Doesn't have to go into a specific reserve or anything, could be used for operating or anything in between. The vast majority of municipalities that have a MAT have set this tax at 4%. Over 40 have implemented it across Ontario, including our neighbors in Barrie and Orillia. Toronto, Ottawa, Niagara Falls, and Prince Edward County. So a lot of the iconic tourism destinations across Ontario. In 2021, as a bit of context for the impact of tourism on our economy, Collingwood had over 550,000 unique visitors to the community, many of which visited multiple times, totaling approximately 3.2 million total visits. And that's Environics data. We use some geofencing. It's through RTO7 and a couple of our other partners in the tourism sphere. Collingwood is soon to have over 900 hotel, motel, and resort rooms across over 15 properties. You may see one under construction right now. And one data point of note that we want to talk about, it relates to COVID recovery. Specifically occupancy rate, we use as a standard for this, with the caveat that obviously this is going to vary from operator to operator. So you'll see some below this, some above this. Over the past 10 years, and we use CoStar for this data, the average occupancy in Collingwood was 57.4%, with the current average occupancy right now at 59.1%. This is generally consistent across, many of the significant tourism destinations in Ontario. You'll see a chart. Blue is included in the report, is included in the longer report provided by the consultants. Obviously, a caveat to this is that 10-year average includes 2020 and 2021, which were pandemic affected years. So financially, we want to emphasize this point. The consultants, McSweeney and Associates, really experienced consultants in the economic development and tourism sphere, were instructed to use the most conservative numbers available in all cases. We want to give council and the community the most confidence in that minimum collection number, so you're able to make decisions and comfort in that part. So additional data collection will obviously need to happen if council were to move forward at this point. And we'll continue to do that with our consultants and with ourselves. So conservatively, we estimate in the report that using a 4% tax, which is generally the standard, the town could collect between $880,000 and $1.4 million annually. And this is through traditional accommodators only. And when we talk about short-term rentals, a MAT could apply to them as well. Council can make that decision, yes or no. Though we have less confidence on the financial matters because there are more, there are more things to consider, especially with a pending council decision that will likely have some sort of impact. There's also a wider variety of, types of accommodations. When you look at short-term rentals, houses down to rooms, there is a really significant, a wide variance of rates and other things. But generally, with all that aside, subject to change, our high-level estimates show an additional $400,000 a year in an unfavorable scenario, up to $1 million a year collected annually just from short-term rentals. So put those two numbers together. The 1 million on the high end, 1.4 million on the high end, the 880,000 on the low end, the 400,000 on the low end. So put those together. So tonight we're seeking initial council input and direction on whether this is something that staff should continue to pursue. And I'm happy to take any questions and comments you have.
Thank you very much. Would there be any members of the public? I don't see any in this room online, Clerk Almas. No, none. So I'll read in the recommendation here. Whereas a municipal accommodation tax, a MAT, is a revenue tool commonly used by Ontario municipalities to fund tourism activities and general municipal revenues, and whereas Collingwood is one of the most visited and iconic tourism destinations in Ontario, and whereas the Economic Development Action Plan identified the consideration of a municipal accommodation tax as an action item, therefore be it resolved that Staff Report P2023-08, consideration of a municipal accommodation tax, be received, and that Council directs staff to investigate the implementation of a MAT, including community and industry stakeholder consultation, and report back no later than September 2023 on potential options, including associated governance structures and processes. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Perry and Councillor Jeffrey, thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Houston.
Thank you. I have 4 questions and a few thoughts. The first question would be, in the previous corporate and community services meeting, just prior to this, the consultant's report on the Arts and Culture Center indicated that economic development doesn't have a focus on tourism. This seems to be a significant effort that would indicate otherwise. Do we have an identified need for these funds, or is this just a way to generate more revenue for the municipality?
This discussion?
Not the previous discussion, but I am familiar with the report at a high level. Sure. So for us, at this point in time, we do not have a significant tourism presence. We do not do significant investment into tourism from a municipal standpoint. We fund the organization South Georgian Bay Tourism at about $20,000 a year at this point, which has a pretty minimal budget for regional tourism. So there is some attraction there. It's also noted in the report that there's using minimal financial capacity, we've developed 3 experiences locally. So the Discover Collingwood app, the annual Patiolicious, and then the craft beverage capital program. So that's the extent of really the tourism that we do locally. So this could be an opportunity to expand that if council so chooses. And really the second part of the question on what would this necessarily be allocated to, that would be part of the more developed discussions with the industry. The industry is a significant part in this. We had very initial, introductory discussions with many accommodators, continue to have those. They've shown interest to apprehension on the MAT tax itself. It could go to a wide range of initiatives, but as you see, our visitation is very significant, and we've noted a stance internally that experience development and increasing the spend per consumer rather than bringing in more consumers, because many of our accommodators, the occupancy rates are doing quite well. Again, it varies from accommodator to accommodator. The experiences are generally doing quite well, but always opportunity for an improvement. So it's also noted in the report, it may be a competitive disadvantage if a MAT were not brought in. Many communities across Ontario have this, especially the tourism destinations that we're theoretically competing with for that visitation dollar, and obviously a significant impact to the local community from that, whether it be our downtown restaurants or our experience throughout town.
Thank you. I'll just add, CO Skinner would like to add a comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, through you to Councillor Houston as well. The Economic Development Action Plan really doesn't talk about not supporting tourism, but it talks about not necessarily trying to attract more people, but trying to expand the quality of the experience that they have and the spend per person. So with, should council decide to take the next step, some of the things that can be done with the tourism dollars, in addition to, for example, advertising our community, are about things like helping to support operators to expand their offerings and, increase the quality of the things they're doing or develop their businesses further. And, all of any income could be spent with, in the larger tourism space. I know that we're often looked at as a regional hub. And one of the things we find difficult to do is to provide all the services for, many different municipalities, and having some funding beyond that's specifically tourism, but that helps the community and our face to the world could be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
You answered my second question already. It was just if you had any early conversations with any of the local accommodators, and from the sounds of it, you've had both pros and cons, I guess, in that. Okay. Third was this decision to implement this. I mean, it's still a ways away because this is just to look into it. Would it require us to, or need us to wait to make this the final decision to implement a tax after our decision on short-term accommodations if we were to want to add that requirement to them as well?
The nice part about a MAT is that council has the flexibility to build the structure of the bylaw and how it's collected in any way you wish. So, some do on short-term rentals, some do on or don't on short-term rentals, only on short-term rentals in some cases. So there's always going to be flexibility on that. It's not timing specific. If 2 years from now you decided you wanted to add short-term rentals or remove it, you could do so. So it is completely flexible. Obviously, we'd come back with some form of recommendation and by September of this year with that, but it's not, it doesn't require, I suppose, another decision in the interim.
And then my understanding of the legislation from the province is that it requires, you had mentioned at least 50% of the funds to go towards tourism activities. My understanding is it's to go towards a nonprofit tourism eligible entity. To my understanding, we don't actually have one in existence right now that focuses purely on Collingwood. What would the process be to identify an organization?
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's correct. So we don't have a quote unquote tourism Collingwood. We do fund South Georgian Bay Tourism that does act as a regional driver with our neighbors, Wasaga Beach, Clearview, and Town of the Blue Mountains. And you're quite correct. The one requirement from the legislation is that we can't simply give it to a tourism department within the town. It has to be an eligible third-party entity. That could be, something that exists, Tourism Simcoe County, a Southern Georgian Bay Tourism. It could be something that we create as a municipal services corporation. There's some flexibility in governance. Some have created a tourism-only corporation. Huntsville, Markham as some examples. Some have created an economic development corporation, Greater Sudbury as an example. So many sort of different forms. We'll look and look into each of them, and also talk to our partners in the municipal sphere to understand what are the pros and cons, and also what are the results. The municipal accommodation tax has been in the legislation since 2017. So there are quite a few results out there that our partners across the municipal sphere are happy to share.
I'm almost done.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm done with the questions. Just a couple thoughts now.
Yeah.
In regards to getting input from accommodators and others in the industry, because this would have such a significant impact on implementation and administration on their side, I'm almost wondering if it would make sense in having these roundtables or discussions with them to actually have the mayor at that table as well, to be part of council, because I see this as being significant for a lot of these operators to implement in their systems. Maybe not for the larger ones, but for the smaller operators, I can see this being quite a bit of legwork involved. And I think we would love to have, or at least myself would love to have the mayor or somebody on council as part of that discussion. And then the last thought was, since we're talking about taxes and short-term accommodations, have we had the conversation around implementing a vacant home tax in Collingwood that would apply to short-term accommodations and provide some revenue as well?
I think this was a question for, do you want to, who wants to take? No, we haven't. We haven't.
What, you haven't?
No.
Okay.
You could bring a motion.
That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. As far as this tax goes, I have stayed in quite a few hotels the past year and really didn't realize I had paid that tax until I read the list of the towns that are including it yesterday afternoon. So I was quite surprised. I do want to ask about the Airbnbs, whether that would be included in that. And that, I guess, falls into short-term accommodation. But could it be used to help fund an arts and culture center of the other 50%? Or does arts and culture center fall in within the tourism realm? I just want to throw that out there. And I would consider a percentage as a more fair way to do it if we do go down that road, because I noticed Niagara Falls has a $2 per room night. Well, we have quite a variety of hotel rooms and accommodations in town, and going from bare minimum to super expensive. So I would think that would be a more fair way to do it. Like I'm assuming if you get a more expensive hotel room, you have more means to be able to pay the tax. And that's more a comment than anything, but I do think that would be a good road to go down as far as percentage, as opposed to like a dollar amount per night, no matter what type of accommodation you do have. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to answer the questions posed, Manager Kenny?
Maybe just a quick note that the Niagara Falls example is quite unique in Ontario. It's the only one that I've come across that isn't a percentage.
Okay, Councillor Ring.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Hanlon. Manager Kenny, with the in your report, you said the standard seems to be about a 4% tax that the municipalities are charging. Would we have any control on the hotel providers from not piggybacking on that and using an additional tax for profit purposes and just blaming the municipality on the tax when people complain about it? Because you bring up Niagara Falls, and it was not long ago I watched, I'm not sure whether it was W5 or Marketplace, and they covered a lot of hotels in Niagara Falls, and that's what they were doing down there, was really jacking up the price of the room and saying the extra money was a tax going to the municipality for tourism, and it wasn't the case. I'm just wondering, would we have any control on that with this, Matt?
Go ahead.
Thank you. And maybe the easiest way is to sort of compare and contrast the municipal accommodation tax with what you may be familiar with before the regulation came into it, which would be a destination marketing fee, or a DMF. A municipal accommodation tax can only come in through the municipality. It's noted as a specific line item on everyone's bill. It shows the amount. It can't be combined with something else. However, hotels have the flexibility, regardless of municipal regulation, to bring in a destination marketing fee of their own. They can't combine it on a line item. And it always is, it's not a mandatory fee. It's something that can be pulled off, whereas the municipal accommodation tax is mandatory. Can't be pulled off by the person that's visiting that accommodator. So two different things. Some of them happen at the same time. One notable example, sometimes they're resort fees. Blue Mountain Village has such a fee, I believe. There are others. Deerhurst Resort has such a fee. I believe Deerhurst Resort's fees, including municipal accommodation tax, up to 12%. So two different things can happen simultaneously, but would be shown on different line items.
To follow up to that, and I understand that, and I agree with that, that's happening. But what I'm saying what I saw in the report on TV was the consumer, when they complained about the extra tax, were specifically being told that it was municipal tax for tourism, and it goes back in that case they were saying lighting of the Niagara Falls and that type of thing. Would we have any control to stop that? I mean, the hotel chains can add, as you said, the taxes they see fit, but we got any control of stopping them from saying that it's not a tax towards themselves, or is it, and quit referring to the tax going to the municipality?
I think that's a legal question. How do we, really, I think the question is if a hotel operator is misrepresenting the amount they're collecting and saying it's an amount that's a tax for the town and it isn't, I'm sure there'd be remedies. But, I don't think it'd be an enforcement of the town. I suspect it'd be legal action.
It was just that it was kind of embarrassing for the municipality, I'm thinking, because they interviewed the mayor and he stammered and stuttered and didn't know how to answer the question because he knew the tax wasn't going to them, but that they were getting blamed for it. So
yeah, it's a terrible thing. I can't imagine. Hey, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Through you to Manager Kenny, I'm very supportive of this proposal, and I'm so glad to see it come forward. We benefit from a huge number of visitors to our community every year, but they also have negative impacts on our community, and this is a way to help compensate for that. In terms of the amount, when I consider, say, $8 on a $200 a room tax, it's negligible and really not noticeable part of a discretionary expense. So I don't think that we would get a lot of pushback from consumers. I did, in terms of the 50% that the municipality can keep, I can think of any number of good ways that we could apply those revenues. I would be a little bit more concerned about the 50% that has to go to tourism. And I guess it's kind of along the lines of what Councillor Houston was saying. We only have one agency right now that's completely separate from the municipality, and that is our South Georgian Bay Tourism agency, or South Georgian Bay Tourism. Anyway, you know who I mean. So my question would be, if the revenue is coming specifically from the town of Collingwood for town of Collingwood marketing, tourism marketing, how could we control that? Because it's going to an agency that represents all 5 of our South Georgian Bay municipalities.
Go ahead.
South Georgian Bay Tourism is one option. There are other options that do not require regional participation, such as a quote-unquote Tourism Collingwood, which could be a municipal corporation of some kind, which would retain, more control over those funds. But generally, those things are done through governance, and that's something that we'd look at in the second part of this if council were to move forward. So not a ton of information on that tonight, but certainly we'd be looking at that moving forward.
Okay, so, and that would be legitimate that we would set up a third-party organization that would administrate this fund for us? Is that would be legitimate governance model?
Yes. It's an opportunity that many municipalities have taken before us.
Thank you.
Councillor Ring? Oh, Councillor Potts.
Thanks, Mayor
I'll
Hammond.
get it by year 4.
To Manager Kenny there, just if this were to go through, how do we, control or ensure that the accommodators are actually providing the town with the funding that would be that they're collecting, that it's not, we're only getting, say, 40% of the tax and they're keeping the rest? Like what kind of inventory, or if you will, what would be in place to ensure that we are getting the full tax?
Perhaps, Councillor Potts, speaking of auditing, how do we monitor that, right? Yeah. Do you have any thoughts?
I do. There is a bylaw that would be put in place under this. It's done, all 40 municipalities that have brought it in, that compels the payment of funds, and it could show penalties if there were not the payment of funds. Now, to your note of, what does the VAT actually entail, even if they're paying it, what is the full payment? There is going to have to be some form of audit procedure on top line revenue, which is generally what is looked at in these cases. We don't want to get into the line by line of private businesses' books. However, there are really strong standards across the municipal world that have dealt with this in organizations with hundreds and hundreds of hotel accommodators. So some really good best practices to follow for that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not necessarily to Manager Kenny, but perhaps to yourself, following up on Councillor Houston and Councillor Doherty's point about a new mechanism, Tourism Collingwood. Perhaps this would be a wonderful discussion point with your mayor's round table with the accommodators, because there could be some, I won't suggest friction, but a change in the relationship if we're supporting both the South Georgian Bay Tourism Board or Association and this new entity comes up. But I think it's a wonderful concept. I think it should be studied as far as it can. I just would like to have more flesh to the bones of what Tourism Collingwood would be vis-a-vis South Georgian Bay Tourism Board. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. Director, Deputy Mayor Pryor.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. And I most of my questions have been covered. Good food for thought from the questions councillors have been asking. And I had a similar thought to Councillor Baines. when Councillor Houston brought up the idea of participation, I got to thinking of that roundtable situation, because we talked about how it would be particular sectors of our industry that we would meet with and such. And I've been looking forward to that kind of first pilot test of that to participate. So I see that as a real mechanism to look at this. And I agree, within the report it states if we don't further investigate, we don't really get a clear understanding of the potential benefits or the drawbacks. So I'm very supportive of moving it to the next stage. And I think I'll just add that it appears to me like the right mechanism for us would be a percentage, not the room rate. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. Really, all of my points have been raised, and I agree with the Deputy Mayor that we really need to get to the next step. This has been on the books for a very long time. I would say at least 3 councils in getting it to where it needs to be here. And I think most of my questions will come up at the next stage. So,
yes.
Did think of one thing that I was going to ask Manager Kenny if he knew, because we were talking about South Georgian Bay tourism, and that we're a supporter of it along with our immediate neighbors. Are any of our immediate neighbors looking at a similar tax at this point in time? Do you know?
To my knowledge, Town of the Blue Mountains may be considering one. I don't believe Wasaga Beach is considering one, and I believe Clearview is considering one as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just say, when I heard the questions around the South Georgian Bay tourism, my thought was that if all of the municipalities that are part of that group decided to impose this tax, then we have a vehicle that we could use. So I think Southern Georgian Bay tourism, as I understand it, is doing the marketing for our region. The half that can go for tourism from this kind of a tax can be used for marketing and promotion, but also infrastructure that can be used for tourists and the community. So, just the thought going through my mind, if it ended up at a more regional kind of, entity, we might still like the opportunity to funnel funds down to a municipal level for the infrastructure part. And what's always on my mind are when I hear, why don't we have more public washrooms for the tourists in town, right? We can't really share them with Clearview. So anyway, there's a lot of thinking to be done around this still. And I think if when we're consulting with the operators of the hotels, I think it would be useful to have an idea in our minds of how this tax could benefit their business, because I'm sure they will be thinking along the lines we've heard here tonight, that this is a pain for them to have to collect it. But I do think there will be great advantages to them if we are enhancing their business by the use of the funds that are obtained. And I do think, like it's in your report, even at a conservative calculation, we'd be collecting $1 million a year. And I think that those are based on really low occupancy rates. I know you're giving some numbers of 57, 59%. But I had always understood a sort of normal occupancy for a hotel was 70%. And I think the lower numbers, as you explained, we had a couple of years of COVID in there. So I have to think we're more up at the normal, what I would think of as normal occupancy, because we know there's, as you pointed out, yet another hotel under construction. So all to say, I'm expecting great amounts of money for us. And great enhancement of our marketing, promotion, and tourism-related infrastructure if this comes to pass. So I'm in favor of taking it to the next step. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. And just with your comments there, and I'm very much was thinking the same idea, that this has such a regional potential, and it removes that county boundary, and so I'm very supportive of that. Is it something that has been spoke about at the mayor's sessions that I know you've only attended the one. Is it something that has been brought up or?
No, I don't think it's been on anyone's agenda to talk about individually maybe, but not on a, I'll say region-wide basis. Yeah.
But you could take that forward then, and I think it's a great idea, so.
Okay, so we've had good discussion here. We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Manager Kenny. We have two staff reports now that we're going to hear from our Treasurer Quinlan on. The first one is our preliminary year-end financial statements, and the second is the statement of remuneration for 2022. Over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to members of council. It seems a little loud. Was that loud? It's okay. So as part of your agenda package tonight, we've prepared a staff report to provide council with a preliminary look on the year-end financial results. We've completed the field work for our audit for this year, although we are anxiously awaiting the first draft of our financial statements from our audit team at Baker Tilly. We've also completed or added some additional analysis of salaries and full-time equivalents as Appendix A. And I think this was a really important part of the work, given that this is a major contributor. Back up? Okay, I gotta go back up, sorry. Is that better? Okay. I feel like it seems loud. So we've added some analysis on salaries and full-time equivalents as Appendix A, and I think that was a really important part of the work, given that this is a large contributor to our overall expenses. In the report, we talk about the year-end surplus. So at the end of this year, again, it's unaudited as we wait for the final field work to be completed. The total amounted to $608,000. I'll make a note that this represents about 1.6% of the total municipal levy, the $36.9 million that we charged out in taxation for 2022. And it's about 0.005% of the overall $115 million worth of expenses we contribute to throughout the year. As noted in the report, the surplus was applied to first the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund at an amount of $225,000, as was discussed as part of the 2023 budget. And this brings this reserve to about $575,000. So it's added quite a bit to that reserve over the year. The next steps were that we followed the surplus management policy, which meant that $37,000 was applied to the capital contingency reserve, and then the remainder, $345,000, was applied to the life cycle reserve. Once the audited statements are completed and brought forward, and we expect that to happen in the first committee meeting in June, the finance team will follow up with additional reporting from a financial perspective, including the year-end reserve amounts, the debt amounts that are available, and our comparison in terms of financial indicators that the province issues. So that'll be coming up as soon as we get the audited statements. I think what we've provided is some good information. It helps council to see where there are areas of deficit and or surplus and how the overall 2022 budget spending progressed. And I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up.
Okay, thank you very much. Would there be any comments from members of the public online? Okay, so the recommendation before us is that Staff Report 2023-10, 2022 preliminary year-end financial statements be received for information. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Houston, Councillor Doherty. Any questions from council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. So a lot of great information here, and I particularly appreciated the expanded report you've done on with respect to human resources and the impact within our budget. So from a bigger perspective, that $892,000, and we call it in the report in favor of the budget. I would call it a non-use of of human resources because it does impact us in the services that we deliver and our ability to do so. Through the mayor to the treasurer, would that 892,000 be net of what we paid in terms of contractor overtime to do some of the jobs that were not being able to be done, or is that the gross before those amounts are deducted?
If I may, Your Worship, through you. I would say that that is specific to the salary variance. Now, where we've hired, and sorry, I'm going to back up a little bit because I'm getting very loud again, where we've hired additional people to assist. So you'll see in the notes that there were a few additional positions added where it was required throughout the year. That has been incorporated. But if, for example, we went out and hired a consulting firm to complete a body of work that wasn't necessarily expected, it wouldn't be included in here. That being said, I don't believe that situation existed in 2022. However, it is something that we need to be cognizant of when we're committing to this report or delivering this report, I suppose.
Thank you. So, and then also as a follow-up, again, in the bigger picture, if we look at the overall surplus of 608,000 and a non-use of human resources of 892, basically those human resources funded non-human resources things. And the question that I asked at orientation and the question I asked during budget was specifically that I don't believe that our budgeting for our staffing should be able to be absorbed in other line items, because there can be a situation where a department can not hire or not put in position a certain staff request and use it to offset against another expense item within their budget. So I'm a little bit fussed about being able to take those non-use human resources amounts and funding other expenses within a department, which is why I was asking kind of for them to be kept separately. So I know the response at the time was that you felt it was going into the general reserves somehow and that offset it, but it doesn't really, because it's still being used for expenses that aren't for our staffing. It's such a huge component of what we do that I just think it's the part that we need to keep the healthiest. And I know our budget's built on budget to budget. So whatever you increased already for that budget and didn't hire them is already included in the next budget. So we don't have to worry about it making it worse on the next budget for us. But I'm just really fussed about that little component about using wages to offset other expense line items.
If I may, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Jeffrey. So I appreciate the comment, and I do understand. I guess what becomes a bit difficult is, first I'll say the 800,000 in salaries is across the board. So it includes non-tax supported too, so which isn't coming into impact when it comes to the 600,000. I haven't done the math, but I think it's in the neighborhood of that anyways when we talk about fully tax supported. I think just to give an example, let's say on one line item, you might be going over in materials because, and I'm just going to use an example because it helps me work through my explanation. But let's say the price of something has gone up considerably in that year and we didn't budget for that. Yeah, you're right. If you looked at the net, and I'm going to pick on Public Works because it's easy, but the net of that department would be less of a surplus because you're essentially managing within the total dollars. But I do think that those occasions happen. And I also think that, when it comes to being able to accommodate or make the hires, it's not a conscious decision necessarily to say we're not moving out. There's lots of factors that come into play. But I do think at the end of the day, when we look at the total surplus, it all goes into, regardless, life cycle reserve, we follow that surplus management policy. So as long as we keep that tight, and I think we'll have much better reporting going forward. We're going to get Q1 coming in May. There that maybe we can try and answer the question, but I think it's nearly impossible to almost, well, I shouldn't say it's not impossible, but it doesn't always work out 100% that you'll be able to hire that person at the exact time that you would expect to be able to. And we do have, and we always will, and we have them in our own personal budgets too, where prices are just higher or things change in the marketplace from the time when we budget to the actual time you go to spend. So I guess I'm not really answering your question, but I think the saving grace is, at the end of the day, it gets applied to the general town surplus. So it's not as if, and if, using that example that I have, as if Public Works is able to use that funding for major items, because there are rules around how far we can go and manage within that budget. The CAO has to approve that as well. And it does end up in that general surplus. So I think that's the protection against that. And I think having this report will also be protection for that as well, or at least keep it very transparent.
Yeah, thank you. I do agree with that, and I do appreciate the extra information. So it'll kind of be something I process for the next budget discussion in terms of how we can deal with that. But no, it's an excellent result for the community, and I think they should be very happy. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Fryer.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. Regarding the 2023 draft financial statement report, the detailed information is appreciated, but some of the information compels me to refer back to a previous submission made to Council during the 2023 budget process. In pursuit of finding other solutions rather than imposing a 2.7% tax increase, a majority of Council unsuccessfully tried to get reconsideration for at least further review. That should have been strong enough, but unfortunately wasn't. This was extremely disappointing to me because, in my opinion, if review had been undertaken, the suggestions that would have been presented would have led to a significant reduction in the 2.7% increase. That's even clearer to me after this report and last month's investment summary have been provided to us. An updated year-end variance estimation was going to be sought, and since that was just a few weeks ago, it's likely that Council would have learned that the expectation was a further surplus of almost $350,000, or roughly 0.9%. That, along with the 1.1 in capital tax change reduction, would have brought the overall change to only 0.7%. In consideration that a significant tax increase was proposed back in November, I continually stress that 2023 budget did not have to be rushed through. Clearview and Wasaga Beach have taken the approach and plan to approve in the next couple of weeks.
I think if I can just interrupt.
That being said,
I think at this stage, I have to interrupt because, at this stage, the decision was made.
I have my 5 minutes.
No,
Yes.
not on this point. This is a chair's ruling.
This is preliminary to my questions on the report.
Well, and then make your preliminary comments without reference to decision of this council, which you have to support at this stage.
And
you are not here to re-argue a decision of council. That is inappropriate. So please slightly change your introductory remarks.
I'm referring back to it only. That being said, I realize that work will be underway to prepare for the new mill rate. But I also know that I had stated from the outset that in the event of a tax increase, when actual 2022 amounts were known, any additional surplus should be returned directly to the taxpayer first opportunity. Therefore, regarding the additional $350,000 of surplus treatment, I have a couple of initial questions. Through you, Mayor Hamlin, to Treasurer Quinlan. From some of the content in previous budget-related reports and email responses, it was reviewed that 2019, the working capital reserve, which is the one that tax change mitigation comes from, had about $3.9 million in year-end balance. Of course, that was significantly reduced when previous council decision about the $5 million of unfinanced inquiry expense should have been covered by reserves rather than call-us funds. In any event, Treasurer Quinlan had indicated to us that the $3.9 million was about $1 million higher than surplus policy's 5% of net own source revenue target balance level. also that in 2021, there was 1.5 million in working capital reserve. So my first question is it still the case that at the end of 2022, there's the $1.5 million in working capital reserve?
Go ahead.
If I may, Your Worship, through you to Deputy Mayor Fryer, I'm just pulling up my reserve fund list. So the year ending 2022 working capital reserve fund is at 1.66 million, so nearly 1.7 million.
Follow up, please.
Yes.
So I recall it was 1.5 at the end of 2021. So would that be probably interest added into the reserve?
If I may, Your Worship, through you, it is both interest allocated and as part of the annual budget, a $60,000 amount is transferred to that reserve.
Okay. And an additional follow-up, in FIN-004-001 is still the current surplus policy that we're working with, I believe. And so the target balance is still the 5% of own source revenues?
Go ahead.
My apologies, I don't know the policy number. I'd have to pull it up to look at it, but it sounds right. And it's 5% of own source revenues is the maximum, not the target, but the maximum balance.
Okay. So what is the target then?
So I'll have to pull up the policy, but the way the policy reads is essentially that the minimum balance that's able to be, or the minimum balance for the reserve is, I believe, 750,000 to the maximum amount of the 5% of own source revenues. Again, I'd need to pull it up, as when I'm doing my reserve transfers, we look specifically at that. But yes, that would be, I'm just going to pull it up to be sure. Just give me a second.
I think that's okay. I think what you're saying, and not to put words in your mouth, is there's no real set target. We're about the middle range where we sit right now.
I would say that's true, yes. So there is a target in the sense that there's a minimum and a maximum, but we're right in the range of the middle of the road.
So if that's the case, then I would be supportive of the $345,000 going into working capital reserve for direct tax relief in 2024, rather than the proposed life cycle reserve allocation. And I base that on the past few years. Council has adopted budgets with average surplus balances of more than $1.5 million, in spite of what was to be considered zero-based budgets. I expect the more accurate budget results over the last couple of years that we've seen. I expected that would happen, and unfortunately, some of the reduction to overall surplus is because of the growing spending. Coupling that with the increase in taxes that we've now had to do, I think it's critically important that the surplus policy requirements for the working capital reserve be adhered to. So I wouldn't be supportive of it going to life cycle reserve. I'd be supportive of it going to working capital reserve. And I do have other questions in regards to the appendix and the salary information, but I was anticipating taking those offline because I'd work on those over the next couple of weeks for when it's presented at council.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. Any other questions? I have one, and Treasurer Quinlan. There's a note here about the $6.5 million expected from New Tecumseh, and this is with respect to the water agreement we signed with them last year. Have those funds been received yet?
If I may, Your Worship, yes, they were received in November of 2022.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. All right. That's all those in favor. And that's unanimous. Thank you. Oh, and one opposed.
Well, because it's saying that it's going to life cycle reserve, so.
Okay. One opposed. Okay. So, and then the statement of remuneration, please.
If I may, Your Worship. So this is just an annual requirement that the town has to publish the remuneration that's occurred for every council member. This year it's a little bit bigger because of course we've got the overlap of both councils. It's not detailed in terms of where and you've been and what types of professional development you have done. We do provide detailed information on the council page on our website, but for this specific piece or for this specific report, it's just a requirement. I shouldn't say just, it is a requirement under the Municipal Act. And I also provided a copy to council prior to it being published, just in case we're missing any information specific to other boards that you may receive from some remuneration from. I have a very difficult time saying that word. So I think just from our standpoint, it is strictly an annual thing. We must do it every year, and it's checking off that box as part of the Municipal Act.
Okay, thank you. And the recommendation is that staff report 2023-09, 2022 statement of remuneration be received for information. And before I ask for a mover and a seconder, I should have just clarified, there's still no one there. Okay, gotta have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Doherty, and all those in favor. Thank you, that's great. Any opposed? All right, unanimous. There are no consent items on the agenda tonight. Are there any public delegations? Still no public delegations. Are there any items of other business, Council? So we're at adjournment. Councillor Potts. Although you have something to say before the end? Oh, he's ready to vote. Okay, all those in favor, we're out of here. Thanks, everyone.
It's just
I know handwritten notes. That's because I'm already